Good afternoon and thanks for joining us right here on Midday Kentucky. Well, lately here in the US there have been many high-profile sexual harassment scandals with names like Harvey Weinstein, not Lee Harvey I should say, and Kevin Spacey. Sexual harassment of course exists on all parts of this country as well. And with news surfacing that local representatives here in Kentucky have also settled sexual harassment claims, today we will be talking in depth with Lynn Soward-Zellin from Kincaid and Stilts about sexual harassment and its implications for your average American citizen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We decided to dedicate the whole top of the show to this. Okay, so let's start off with a very simple question, and so people understand exactly what we're talking about. What is the difference between sexual harassment and sexual assault?
Well, sexual assault is a criminal term for, it would encompass things like rape, sodomy, and they're going to be physical sexual acts. Sexual harassment can take a physical form as well, but it's a broader term, and it's used in the civil context. So that's not a crime. It's something that occurs typically in the workplace is what we think about. And it's unwelcome sexual advances, sexual banter. It can be physical or verbal harassment, and it's something that rises to the level that it interferes with your ability to do your job. It creates an abusive working environment that interferes with your work.
So what could the possible punishment be then for someone who is sexually harassing someone else? What's the extent of punishment that can be incurred?
Sure. The first level would be within the company. So it would be reported up the ladder. Usually there's a policy in place to set forth the procedure that the victim would follow for reporting it, and then the company would perform an investigation and take action. It could range from remedying the situation, depending on the severity of the harassment and the context in which it's taking place, to separate the victim and the harasser from each other. It could involve suspension or even termination at that level. Beyond that, if the employer fails to remedy the situation, there can be lawsuits, there can be administrative claims and sanctions against the employer on that level.
Yeah.
Well, Lynn, I guess I'm curious. We discussed the difference between sexual harassment and sexual assault, but so many people now talking about what's the difference between sexual harassment and maybe a lighthearted joke. You know, how do you know when it's crossed that line and when you should speak up or take it to your boss?
Well, really kind of the hallmark of sexual harassment is that it's unwelcome. And you don't always know whether that crude joke is welcome or not. A good rule of thumb, though, would be is if you have to question whether it's going to be welcome or not, maybe don't make that joke to that person. And even if you're engaging in some sexually charged banter with a coworker, there may be someone who's overhearing that who isn't comfortable with it, and who it then makes their work environment abusive or hostile.
And see, this is where it becomes very muddy. Do you know what I mean? Because if I'm having a conversation with Katie, and it's our conversation, and someone maybe from 3 cubicles over has picked up on what we're saying, should we be in trouble for that? Because they are feeling uncomfortable? Because might not, it depends on the type of conversation. Like I'm just...
It always has to, it comes back to context. It comes back to the frequency, the severity of the conduct. Some employers simply have policies in place that prohibit conversations or conduct that is sexual in nature to avoid those kinds of questions. But then from the victim standpoint, if something is making you uncomfortable, that's a sign that you should come forward and say something about it. Whether it's just saying something to you and Katie, hey, your all's conversation is making me uncomfortable, will you please stop? That might be a good first line of defense. Yeah. If that's ineffective, then you take the next step. You go talk to your manager, or you talk to the human resources manager, and follow the procedures that are set forth by the company for addressing those issues. And then they should take that next step and address it with the people who are making you uncomfortable.
Are there any legal guidelines for that? I know people fear going to their boss because maybe nothing will be done, or then they think they'll be retaliated against them. Is there anything that people at home can know if you go to your boss? Are there any requirements on employers to take action with a complaint like that?
Well, you spoke about the fear of retaliation,
Yeah.
and there are laws that prohibit retaliation for good faith reporting of perceived sexual harassment or other unlawful conduct.
Okay.
And so know that those protections are in place, and your employers should have policies in place also that prohibit retaliation, both by anybody who's accused and by people who are investigating. And the best practice for employers then is to have a standard procedure that they follow anytime there's a complaint made, and to take all complaints seriously, treat them uniformly, speak with the victim, speak with the accused, try to maintain confidentiality as much as you can in the process, speak with people who might have been witnesses, and evaluate the situation and take appropriate action.
But I still think that people are very hesitant to come forward when they are being sexually harassed, because even though there's policies in place, there's still, to prevent them from possibly climbing the ladder in their company, there's still that fear that, they can kind of skirt around that. They can say, well, you were late, 2 times, and so therefore we gave the job to so-and-so instead of you.
You mean if you complain to HR?
If you complain to HR, if you make the complaint, that there's still a very strong fear, I think, of a lot of people that they're still going to be retaliated against. Even though the company is following their policies that are in place, there's still ways to skirt around those policies, and I think there's a real fear of people coming forward.
I think you're right, there is that fear, but in my experience, and we work mostly from the standpoint of representing employers, in most instances they're going to investigate that in good faith and take measures to make sure that their workplace is a good place, a good environment for all of their employees.
Lynn, we all know that HR represents a firm, a company. They're not really there for representation of an employee. So when Lisa's saying sexual harassment, that is a very broad statement. I'm not saying that you're wrong. What I'm saying is a conversation Katie and I are having, and then a co-worker overhears that might not be sexual harassment. What is sexual harassment? Or verbal abuse or physical abuse. Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure, and one thing to keep in mind is that the law, it doesn't protect you from the phrase that's used a lot is petty slights and insults. So if there's a one-off comment that you thought was inappropriate, that probably doesn't rise to the level of illegal harassment. It needs to be conduct that is severe, pervasive, frequent. So a court would look at how long did this go on? Was it a daily thing, or did it happen once a year where you overheard an inappropriate joke being told? They would look at the context. So there are a lot of factors to consider, and it definitely look at the frequency and how severe, how offensive, and that leads me to what's called a reasonable person standard.
Okay.
It's judged from the standpoint of a reasonable person. So if someone is just hypersensitive to something that most people would not find offensive, that's probably not going to be actionable either. So,
well, in terms of action, I'm wondering if you can shed any light on, we keep hearing about these settlements. 5 years ago, there's been 10 settlements or different things with Harvey Weinstein, but now even local representatives here in Kentucky were now coming out and they're admitting they have settled cases of sexual harassment. I know if you're not directly involved in the case, you don't know those specifics, but when we're hearing that, a representative has settled a case of sexual harassment, what should, people at home take that to mean? What's involved in a settlement? Is it financial?
Not knowing the terms of any of those settlements, I can't comment on them in particular. But settlements take different formats. A lot of times it is financial because... And
to shut your mouth.
Yeah, does
So
that usually come along with that, like Harvey Weinstein accusers?
There would usually be some kind of confidentiality provision in there that you won't make a comment about the settlement. Or there might be a non-disparagement clause that you mutually, that I won't make any negative comments about you and you won't make any negative comments about me either. There's usually no admission of liability, but there are always costs involved with litigation and claims, and so sometimes there really is a settlement when there hasn't been any wrongdoing.
Exactly.
That's what I was wondering about.
Say that again?
Sometimes there is a settlement even though there hasn't been wrongdoing.
So why would you settle that?
Because
the accusation.
They don't even want to go, they don't want to take it all the way and spend all the money and time.
So it's not a presumption of guilt is kind of what I was
It's
asking.
expensive to defend a claim or to defend a lawsuit. And there's also the risk to your reputation where even if an accusation is made publicly, even if you were going to defend it to the full extent that you're able, that there's still been some harm done.
Yeah.
But you know,
So-
when people settle, when they settle though, to me, I'm thinking they were guilty. They were
Yeah.
guilty of something, and they settled it to hush it
And I
up.
think that's the perception of most people.
Right.
But, you know, we all know that, you know, there are some times when in other legal forms, you know, where, you know, a car crash as an example, you know, a major manufacturer might settle just to close it down. Do you know what I mean? They
Right.
might not have been
Exactly.
at fault, but they feel that if they go to court, there could be some form of settlement there with
Sure.
But it's a
notoriety.
shame that the perception
But
is,
that's us
is
as
guilty.
A, as a
you
race.
know, it's
Do you know what I
guilty.
mean? As humans. I just find it, you know, I think there's such a fine line nowadays. We're all so sensitive to what's going on. And I think something you brought up earlier, what a reasonable person would consider. So my next question to you is, what do you do? Is it best if Lisa's overhearing our conversation, she come to us and talk to us, so then there's no animosity against us going back to Lisa and going, well, you went to the boss and, you know, so now we're going to exclude you. And do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, what is this? Is it the right thing to do? Or is it just better to go to HR? Like,
It's always going to be fact specific, and, and it's going to depend on every situation and your relationship with your coworkers. But hopefully, you have a relationship with your coworkers such that you can go to them and tell them that their conduct is making you feel uncomfortable. But if that doesn't work, then you should feel comfortable going to your manager, going to the HR department, following whatever reporting procedures are in place. And that's something that the employer can take measures to make sure that people know that those lines of communication are open, and that there won't be any retaliation or reprisal. And part of that comes with what I talked about before too, about treating all claims equally, having a uniform process by which you respond and that you take action where it's appropriate.
Well, Lynn, I'm wondering, we're hearing about this so much in the news now, every industry. And, you know, I know so many friends that don't work in news, they work in other industries, and they experience sexual harassment, and now they're speaking out. Or we're hearing so many stories, and a lot of people are saying, well, now there's a rash of sexual harassment in the country. Do you think we're seeing a rise in sexual harassment? Or are we finally now just talking about it?
Got
And
the
do you think
guts.
this will do something about it? What do you think legally?
You know,
do you think we're seeing more, or we're just hearing about it more?
From a legal standpoint, you know, I really can't say whether it's happening more or
Right.
Yeah.
whether there's just heightened awareness. But, you know, anecdotally, I could say that, you know, I think maybe some employment lawyers' phones have been ringing a little more recently, and it probably as people are becoming more aware, thinking about it more, you know,
Okay.
thinking like, hey, maybe that wasn't appropriate.
Bringing
Maybe I should
awareness.
say something, and so kind of just heightened awareness.
And by you saying that also, Katie, does bring to light of how severe, you know, are people taking it to the next level where it doesn't really need to be, because it's more in their mind. When I say this, I want to be clear. So let's just say we're talking about, you know, harassment in some way. Are they, because of the heightened awareness, they think that their standing is much higher than what it really is? Do you see what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
for-
I understand.
Yeah.
I think that would
Yeah.
be something you'd
I
have
want
to
to be
ask
careful the way I said that.
Right, I think that'd be something that you'd have to ask the accusers, where they're coming from, what inspired them to come forward at this point. You know, I can't say.
Yeah, I get
As a
you.
lawyer, I'm
Do you
not
think
sure I
people
have
should
any better
err on the
perspective
side
on that.
of speaking
Yeah.
up and then let the investigation play out? Do you think that if you suspect something or you feel uncomfortable, you should always go to HR or speak up, right? And let them decide if it's an offense, if you
Right,
feel
I think
uncomfortable?
if you don't give your employer a chance to
Yeah.
fix the situation, then you can't really hold them accountable for, you know, unless they were aware of it. They have
Gotcha.
to be made aware, and you know, that's the employees. You know,
Yeah.
that's your first line of protection, is to go to your employer and give them a chance to fix the situation.
We could talk all day. I think it's a very fascinating
think it
topic.
is too.
Thank you so much, Lynn. We really
Thank you for
appreciate
having me
it. For more today's Table Talk discussion, head over to Kincaid and Stilts. All the information is up on the screen. If you feel that there's some jeopardization in your life in regards to what we were talking about, you know, maybe just get a little bit more information. Give them a buzz, everyone. Hey, up next, we'll get a taste of some live music from Brother Smith. Plus, later on, we'll check out some trendy ideas for fall decorating. You're watching Midday Kentucky, everyone. Stick it right here.